Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you all the books that I ended up reading in the month of February. So despite it being the shortest month of the year, I read a total of 6 books. Half of these were audiobooks, and I feel like I've just really gotten into audiobooks lately. I feel like especially with nonfiction, I find I enjoy audiobooks like version over reading them, especially if it's like a memoir and it's narrated by the author. I think that makes it slightly different and more enjoyable, and you can kind of get some of the emotion for what they're talking about. So I'm really excited to share all the books I read with you. They're kind of all over in terms of genre as well, which makes it a lot of fun. So without further ado, let's get started. So starting up, this is a book that I first listened to as an audiobook, and it is Spare by Prince Harry. I was so excited for this book to be coming out because I think he's lived a very interesting life, and just kind of hearing his perspective of going through everything that he's gone through I think is really interesting. And I'm not gonna lie, I low-key love drama, so I was like totally here for it. But this is basically just his memoir talking about kind of growing up, losing his mother, kind of the loss of privacy that comes with being a royal, and his struggles with substance abuse and mental health, and kind of Meghan and everything that happens after that. I really love this, especially with the audiobook. I got it from the library, and you can really kind of hear some of the emotion of things he talks about. And it's really like, I think his life is very like, despite having all these privileges, I think it's very sad that basically one of the themes is kind of the press and the exploitation of kind of the press with the royal family, and then also how the royal family kind of reinforces all of the like, I think they're the makers of their own happiness. They create these rules and the system that they're in, and I think it's just like a never-ending spiral for them to like maintain power. So I think it's good that he's kind of eventually got to the point where he felt okay enough to step away. And I don't know, I love the drama. I know this book has caused a lot of controversy. I feel like a lot of people either love him and Meghan or they hate them. So I was like the reviews are very mixed, but overall I did enjoy it. I think it's kind of written kind of sporadically too. It's somewhat chronological, but some like chapters are like shorter than others. It's more kind of, I would say, kind of stream of consciousness sometimes too, recounting some of these things. And I think it's a very interesting like view behind the curtain of the royal family. So you can tell I really enjoyed this. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I think, like I said, I think if you are interested in the royal family, and you're kind of familiar with all of the stuff surrounding Harry and Meghan, it's good to kind of get their perspective on things. And yeah, it's just some of the stuff like blew me away. It's just, I don't know, like I said, they're creators of their own happiness with the systems that they create, but I think it goes to show that there's more to kind of royal life that meets the eye. Next up, I ended up finishing this monster of a book, and I feel very triumphant for doing so, and it is Jade Legacy by Fonda, the final book in the Green Bone saga. And I'm so proud of myself because like this book is ginormous. So I don't want to spoil too much about this book in particulars, but I'll give you a quick synopsis of this series overall. Essentially, you follow this family who is head of one of the Greenbone clans on the island of Kong, and this island has what is the only resource for jade, but people who are susceptible to it can have superhuman powers. And the first book is very much kind of focused on the in politics of the island of Kong itself between two rival clans. And then over the course of this trilogy, you follow this family for the course of probably 4 decades. So you definitely get to see them kind of go through a lot of things over the course of like 40 years. And I think that's a really interesting time perspective, especially this one here. There's a lot of time jumps, and I think this book, like this series, could have been like dragged out over many books just given the timeline, but I feel like the time jumps in this one just make the story flow a lot better. You can get to see some of the things that kind of how they like small things in the beginning and their impact kind of throughout the years, and I really like seeing those things take fold. And the Cull family in particular, I just think it's very interesting, especially kind of with each book, the scope and the world of this world just gets bigger and bigger. Like I said, the first one really focuses on the inter-island politics, but it just kind of grows. The second book, you kind of get introduced to the global scale of this, and it just gets bigger and bigger. And I feel like that is just makes it really interesting, and it's very much focused, even though there's fantastical elements, I would say there's a lot of political intrigue in regards to the world and these characters, and just the dynamics and the politics between like all these different like countries and clans. And I really enjoyed it. And what's good too is that the author, I don't say what's good, but like the author doesn't shy away from killing off characters. So the anxiety that you feel when these characters are in life and death situations is really intense, because it's like, I don't know if they're going to make it out alive. It's not like a Sarah J Maas book where it's like everyone miraculously makes it through the end. Like, I feel like this one's much more realistic, and I really liked kind of following this family over kind of so many years. And yeah, I think this was a really good conclusion. It does a really good job at tying in all of the different storylines and kind of concluding them in the way that felt natural. It wasn't rushed or anything. So I'm really excited. Like, she has a new book coming out in the spring that I can't wait to pick up, and I think she is a fantastic author, and I was really kind of blown away by this series. It was recommended by my boyfriend. He said it's probably one of his like favorite newer fantasy series, so my hopes were high, and it met all of the expectations that I had for it. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, this is a book that I listened to via audiobook. You can tell there's just a lot of audiobooks this month, and it is Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. This is one that's been on my TBR for a while, and February being Black History Month, I really wanted to kind of focus some of the books on my TBR that focus on racism and how to be anti-racism. I wanted to integrate that into kind of my reading month. And this is probably hands down one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. Just out of the gate, I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I think this is a book that everyone needs to read. And basically how this book is kind of organized, it looks at different caste systems throughout history, focusing on the Indian caste system, the caste system that was created by Nazis during World War II, and the caste system within the US. And I feel like Isabel Wilkerson as an author is able to really kind of portray these, like, to show you kind of the historical impact and how interconnected a lot of the caste systems are in creating us versus them. And she does it in a way that I think is really digestible for every reader, like regardless of whether or not you kind of have a background in kind of looking at these aspects of society. And I think she does it in a way that is very, like I said, very readable for everyone. And I was really just like kind of blown away with the scope of this book in terms of how she was really able to kind of tie everything together. And it just makes you really frustrated with the system, and it kind of opens your eyes to how much racism and kind of how slavery is still very much the foundations of it, and like the core societal elements are still very much interwoven into the fabric of society. And this just opened my eyes up to more like aspects of it, and I kind of feel like I have a better grasp of how to implement anti-racism into just like my everyday life. This book, I think, is just very impressively researched. It's very powerful, and I don't feel like I'm very eloquent in describing how amazing this book is. Like I said, I think everyone needs to read this book. I think it's very important, and it does deal with a lot of really tough topics, but I feel like she handles them in a way that she doesn't sugarcoat. She's completely honest, and I think that is the way this needs to be done. It's very eye-opening, and like I said, I think this book deserves all the praise that it's gotten because I think it's such a powerful read. Next up, this was a book that was sent to me by the publisher, and this book comes out March 7th, so if you're interested, it'll be coming out very, very soon, and it is The Family Bones by Elle Marr. And I think if you're a fan of Criminal Minds, I think you will really like this. So basically the premise is that we follow Olivia, who is a psychology student working on her dissertation, and she comes from a long line of psychopaths within her family. Her family is very infamous in terms of having a lot of psychopaths basically in the family, and her research is very much focused on nature versus nurture. Is it like the environment that a person grows in that leads them to become a psychopath, or is there a genetic kind of aspect to it? And so she is kind of been very distant from her family, but she mysteriously gets an invite to attend a family reunion at a resort, and it kind of takes off from there. In addition to Olivia's storyline, we get a journal entry of someone we don't really know that is somehow connected with the story. And then then the other one, we follow Birdie, who is a true crime podcaster who is essentially looking into Olivia's family. And like I said, I think if you are a fan of Criminal Minds, I think you will really like this, because it also, in addition to kind of having that nature versus nurture debate, you can tell the author did a lot of research into kind of understanding different like aspects of psychopathy, and they kind of go into kind of the more scientific side of it, which I really enjoyed kind of reading. I will say though, this book is a bit of a slow burn, especially the first half of the book. It's really much kind of, there's a lot of characters. They give you a family tree and there's just so many characters, so it was a little bit hard to keep track of who was who. So I think if you do end up reading this, like make little notes of who, like different aspects, so you can help distinguish which character is which. But once you get past like that 50% mark, it's like you hit the ground running. It goes from like a 2 to 11, and there was points where like my heart was beating out of my chest, and it kind of gives off like Hunger Games vibes in terms of what happens, but it was really intense. And I did kind of guess the plot twist, that there's like a few, and I was able to kind of guess them, but nevertheless I still really enjoyed, especially like the thrilling like second half of the book. So if you can like, you know, struggle through the first half, I think you would enjoy this book. Despite having some pacing issues, I do think it is a very interesting kind of take on nature versus nurture, and just how there is like the integration of the 3 different storylines made it a lot of fun, and it kept you on your toes. So overall, I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't think it was mind-blowing. And like I said, it did have a lot of pacing issues. It got to the point where I was like ready to DNF it, but I pushed through, and I'm happy I did. But that just kind of be forewarned, it is very, very, very slow in the beginning and a little bit confusing because of so many characters. But I definitely think this author has a lot of potential, so I'm curious to see what else she comes up with, because like I said, the second half was a lot of fun. It was just the first part that was like watching grass grow. But yeah, overall it was a decent, you know, thriller. So this was another audiobook that I listened to. I've just been going through all of the audiobooks, like nonfiction books that are on my TBR. I'm like, this is a great way for me to kind of get them off of my TBR. And next up I have The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee, and this book I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought, again, it was very enlightening, and there's been things I'm like, why is it like certain, especially growing up in Canada, there's been many instances where I'm like, why is the US like the only way it is with certain systems? And this book was very eye-opening. It basically talks about how racism is very much integrated into our socioeconomic like structure basically, and how this is basically, we all lose because of how this system has been created. Some examples is that the US, despite being one of like the world leaders in terms of a first world country, it is very much lagging behind a lot of countries in regards to education, healthcare, or even things like basically how good the roads are. So essentially kind of one of the themes is like a zero-sum philosophy, which is essentially where it's like people are like, okay, well, we can compromise and we can all benefit from this, or people have like the zero-sum racist mindset where it's like, I'm either gonna make this benefit me, or you get nothing, or we can help this benefit you and I get nothing. So people kind of have that mentality where it's us versus them, and essentially we all lose because of that mindset. For example, in the beginning of the 20th century, when universities started becoming a thing where people would actually go to, they were actually free, and the schools were given money per each student they have. But when they had to open up their doors to allow Black people onto universities started to essentially kind of privatize or charge a fee, knowing that this is a way, even though we can't turn down people of color, this is a way to kind of gatekeep that. So people obviously, they knew that a lot of Black people couldn't afford to go to school for the prices that they were charging. And that's why when you compare, especially like from Europe to the United States or even Canada, how expensive university is, that was very mind-blowing too in terms of like healthcare systems. That's how it also is as well, where they make it harder. Essentially, one of the cases is, for like example, Medicaid in Texas is like significantly, the cutoff is significantly lower than a lot of the other states, and that is basically set up as a way to make it harder for kind of the lazy Black people not to benefit off of this. But they said disproportionately it impacts more white people than it does Black people in terms of this Medicaid. So it just makes you really frustrated with the system, because it's very obvious that we can, lift everyone up when we kind of get rid of these racist undertones to a lot of the societal setup with these policies. And it's just really frustrating, because it's like, I don't even know how to articulate it, because I'm like, I don't understand why people don't want to lift everyone up, because when we lift everyone up, we're in a better place. And it's just, we're too ingrained with this kind of these racist undertones within policy making, with us versus them, that we all lose. And it's just like, it makes me so mad. But it makes me like, even though this book was very downer, she does kind of give some hope in terms of how things are changing and how there's these new waves of younger politicians that are challenging this status quo. So I think, again, like with Caste, it's just made me more aware of how racism is so interconnected with the fabric of our society, and it just makes you kind of see how it's kind of very much written into our law, where it's like we're just, everyone loses essentially. So it's just really frustrating. But I think everyone, again, like Cass, needs to read this, because I feel like I'm just so much more enlightened with a lot of these things that, like I said, I've always wondered why American healthcare or school systems are the way they are, especially growing up in Canada. And now I know. And lastly, just to finish the month off on a lighter note, I ended up picking up Beach Read by Emily Henry. And this follows two people. If you like kind of basically, if you are a Taylor Swift fan, it's like, what was it? He was sunshine, I was midnight rain. It's kind of like light, like happy people with kind of more people that are like dark and edgy falling in love. So it follows these two writers who were enemies in university, and they end up living next to each other in beach houses in Michigan. And they decide to create a competition, because they're both struggling with a book that they're writing, that they're gonna each write each other's genre, and whoever, book ends up being higher on the bestseller list, that person wins. And obviously they end up falling in love. This one I think is my least favorite of Emily Henry's books. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I've also read People We Meet on Vacation, which I did enjoy a little bit more, and I felt like, I don't know, there was something just like, I don't know, the main character of January, who used to be overly happy and optimistic, is kind of very much down on her luck for a lot of reasons. And I don't know, I found her to be very annoying. Like, I felt like she just doesn't really think things through in terms of just going through life. I felt like the tension, I didn't like the relationship buildup. I just wasn't believable. Like, I didn't feel like that spark or connection, like it wasn't believable to me, as like some of the other relationships are. I've heard like Leonie from the Book Leo, she read all 3 of Emily Henry's books, and she said this one was her least favorite, so that's kind of where I'm standing now, and then Book Lovers was her favorite currently. So I'm hoping that I will like Book Lovers more, but this one wasn't my favorite. My friend said too, she's read this one and People We Meet on Vacation, and she said this one was her least favorite as well. So yeah, so I'm hoping it just only gets better from here. But yeah, this book was like okay, not my favorite kind of like rom-com romance book, but it was like decent. It was a quick read, something to kind of take my mind off some of the more challenging books that I've read this month. So it was just like a light fluffy read to finish out the month. So like I said, it was 3 out of 5 stars. It was okay, not my favorite, but I hope that I enjoy some of her other books a little bit more. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what books you read this month and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.